You know, when they run down the stairs, if you're behind them.
Demi.
Morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I did watch the first 13, 14 minutes of that video from Tuesday, I think it was.
And did you go into also your conversation with Doug? Did you carry on?
Well, it got to about 13, 14, 15 minutes, so I stopped right around where Doug joined because that's where you said you just watch that section with Harry.
Yeah, it's good to watch the transition to, like, that piece too.
Okay. All right.
Good.
Just saying goodbye to Gail. She's leaving to go back to her house-sitting house.
Okay. Nice. I haven't met Gail yet.
Yeah, you're definitely welcome to meet her. We'll have to arrange that sometime. I mean, online it's actually pretty easy. So.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that'd be nice.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, how was your yesterday?
Let's see. Had to pay bills because it's after the first, so a lot of bills came due, so I paid bills. Watched the videos. Tried to do a little bit more on the brain because I think the brain could be kind of useful, at least to me, to navigate things around. Things are in so many different places. I just have to find ways to get them all.
Yeah, I was thinking about my ping last night I was thinking about the work that I'm doing with Rama.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially she just screen shares and goes through her through the pieces, right? And I thought that might be a neat way for you to kind of go through your work as well. So I'm happy to do that with you if you want.
That'd be great. In fact, I'm more used to that style of presentation. In business, I guess most of these online meetings, they don't focus so much on people's reactions. They focus more on the content itself. So the content is what gets shared on screens. So that's what I'm very used to doing that.
Yeah, it's an easy way to hide for sure.
Well, it's not hiding really. If you're really worried about the content.
Kind of is. No,
it's not. I mean, not every forum is about facial expressions and personal reactions, So there's a different kind of emphasis I think we would like to discuss.
Hi, Gertrude. How are you? Oh, we can't hear you quite yet. Oh, you're muted. I've unmuted you. Oh,
okay.
There we go.
I'm busy with the master thesis of so chatbots, digital voice assistants.
Gertrude, I'm going to be in Madison, Wisconsin on February 15th. And my topic is AI and machine learning and chatbots. Just to let you know.
Okay. I just start to learn about it.
And hey, Doug, you're materializing again.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody feeling?
I think I actually got over 7 hours sleep last night.
Wow.
That's amazing.
My wife has me on this tuna oil regimen at night, and it's been triggering insane dreams.
Do you remember any?
I remember one, not from last night, but a few nights back. And it was the strangest thing, but the potency of it was really intense. And it was a man and a woman, and the man was sort of closing in a way that, characteristically was this whole Me Too kind of thing, but closing in a, in a presumed okay paternalistic kind of whatever. And the woman literally just shifted and leveled him. Like physically, it was like woman warrior, like that. And I was like, wow. and it wasn't with anger. It was completely just like this intentional, like, not okay, and what struck me about it was an absolutely, it resonated as exactly what a man would do if another guy was invading space the same way. In the traditional testosterone male to male, but it was just that. And there was no change in demeanor. There was no change in, you know what I mean? It was just, I'm in being, and I can respond and do this, handled, and there's been no disruption of me. That was, I think, the most so anyway, yeah, and it came out of completely left field. I didn't know who either of the people were. It was just almost like this vignette acting out in front of me.
But you felt it was definitely important that the approacher was male and the person the person was female?
Yeah. No, yeah, it was very much just a very different, a completely different sort of paradigmatic experience of her, from a place of, this is what 100% equality, clean, equal human being reality. It didn't have any politics, it didn't have any connotation, it didn't have any layering, it didn't have anything. It was just no. It was a person to person no. Expressed in a completely appropriate way. Like what struck me also was her action wasn't masculine. It was her. It's very, very tough to explain the difference, but I could feel the difference. And it was sort of like seeing a new paradigm, new way, new reality for the first time. Really interesting. Really interesting. I've carried it with me it's been a week now, I think.
Are you saying this is recurring?
No. This was a one-time thing, but it just stuck.
It
was
imprinted.
like, oh my God. It was like, where it immediately was, how to give this like 100% experiential vision realization to men. Like, if you looked at women through this lens, you would never even remotely think about doing half the shit you're doing. You would be approaching women completely differently.
Have you seen?
It was very interesting.
Isn't there a meme on the internet that says, if you pictured The Rock coming at you the way you come towards women, would you do it? Right?
Yeah, well, it was the essence of that. It was the essence of that. Like, you know, yeah, that's it. That's really it. But experiencing it in the dream, like, you know, experiencing it, seeing it, experiencing it was just like, wow. How, I mean, my reaction was, how amazing is that? And how cool is that? And how could that level of mutual awareness, respect, appreciation, understanding, because it was a leveling up. It was like to the guy, you know, he was deaf, dumb, and blind and autonomic in the way he was relating what he was doing with a complete assumption set. And he, you know, no, you're confusing me with somebody else. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, tuna oil. Highly recommend tuna oil. So I'd love to do like quick check-in with everybody. And then I have a question or sort of teaser to use as a launching pad maybe. Unless anybody wants to pick up that thread. That's fine too.
I'm doing great. Feel like the life is really transforming in a beautiful way. And I wondered if I could share a poem after everyone's checked in.
I'm in the middle of a house that's really gone through a little bit of difference in flow the last 3 weeks or so. Some of you may know that I had an opportunity to help out a friend. I don't actually even know this friend very well, just a Facebook friend who needed a place to stay. So I'm in a 30-day situation, and so that's added different flows to the regimen of the house. And then secondly, my girlfriend is going to undergo surgery this coming Friday for gallbladder removal, a cholecystectomy. So because of her past, when she was 12, her mother went into hospital with relatively benign headache symptoms, and then 2 weeks later passed away. So she's got some high anxiety around this upcoming surgery. So I'm trying to help her go through some of that. Otherwise, things are going well. I have this talk I mentioned, Gertrude, where on the 15th, I'm talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, chatbots, virtual agents, to a consortium of about 100 companies. So I'm putting that presentation together. Okay. So life is fun. And these talks are definitely still engaging and getting deeper and deeper. And Facebook follow-up is getting more and more varied and hard to keep up with. So I'm not keeping up with it all. Over for now.
Hello, everyone. I just came home, so I've been at a meditation retreat weekend, so quite intense and in a good way. But I actually did get about 7 hours sleep, so yeah, feeling good. A little tired, but in a good way. So let's yeah. Looking forward to unblock or whatever comes up.
I'm coming back from, it seems like a week. It was three and a half intense days in the hills with ourselves going through an appreciative inquiry process to create ourselves, to look anew who we are, and this was really amazing. It was like I'm the so-called lead link of the Wertschätze and the one who is in charge of the role organization evolution. So we prepared it, and we were the facilitators and at the same time participants, which was not so easy, and a lot of preparation before and after, in between, and but it was such an intense, I could say we never gave ourselves 3 full days to go all the way through. We kind of, at the beginning, before we came together, we created that, and it was half a year in a process. But after that, we cut corners here and there, and this time really like going fully into the vision, everybody themselves, for themselves, creating or collaging a picture, and then bringing that together, and then creating a verbal picture. So really going deep down and broadly through all the steps, and yeah, it's so rewarding when you really do the work as it is supposed to be, then it works. And so destiny, which is like to implement things, new structures or whatever. And I'm just taking pictures from all the things we did, so I can show you a little bit afterwards. I mean, not today, maybe on Thursday, but this is so amazing, and feeling like we are now one team. We're distinct but not separate anymore. So I'm really, my heart is full. So it's been really an interesting week, a very deep week, very connected, with some flaws, with some breakdowns and recovery, and yeah. And we were in the middle of nowhere in a 3-people village. No access to mobile. It was literally like, far away from normal life. I'm back here. Slept till 12 o'clock. So it's now 5:15. And I'm curious about your question.
Well, Tammy, you wanted to interject something before I go to the question?
I wanted to drop a poem into our pool of meaning. And I wrote it about in the year 2000, so it's pretty timeless. I'm forever on the bead of wonder. I love that feeling that I get when I see something that reminds me of the mystery. I love the myths, those echoes down the corridors of time that couch cultural ricochets. I love that soft and malleable place where it can all be true, where there are little fiefdoms of thought that coexist naturally. Like the caterpillar couldn't possibly know what the oak's full wisdom is, but it realizes that it has some, because it exists. Because it is. I want to know things, but I wonder if it's our addiction as a race to figure it all out, nail it down, dissect it, stamp out the mystery before it comes in the night with shroud or fangs. It's like our Linus blanket of knowledge keeps us safe from the profundity of our world. But there's something about being naked, adrift in the sea of creation, bumping into the world naturally within chaos, that is so incredibly freeing and allowing. All possibilities exist within this place. From this place, I have a sense of reverence for all things, and I don't have to presume to know anything. I'm hopeful about our world, where we're going, what we're doing, partly because it seems rare and partly because it seems necessary. Without vision, there will merely be a continuation of the slippery slide down the slope of the 13 families and the oil cartels. I'm hopeful because the alternative is to tie my hands and feet while I watch wide-eyed screaming while the train wreck occurs. I have power. I can think, talk, act, do, write, be. All these can be used to help change the world. One mind at a time, one action at a time, one moment at a time. I'm inspired. I look around me and I see so many talented people, so much potential within us. And though I've been scared of what this life will require of me, I know that I must move forward in my way and find time to get quiet and discover what role I need to play today. I see that we need to build bridges of concept that are not static or fixed, but open and freeing. Not those concepts that start at the edges and work inward, but rather those that start somewhere in the middle and move outward. We've developed rationality to the point where it's simply bursting at the seams of its limitation of us. Rational thinking, though neat and clean, does not speak to the whole of us. Emotional is not rational, and neither is spiritual. Rationale is to the life force what a picture of a tree is to a tree. We are perceptual tools, and our perceptions have been dominated by that which can be seen. We have looked, seen, named, and presumed to have known these things that we see because we've had the audacity to have named them with our childish pointed finger. This ties one hand behind our back while the other is bound by the language within which we conceptualize these things. Have you really looked at a snail lately? It's sticky feelers out of its spiral house, traveling in the same world as us, living its life. We hold ourselves above these things, presupposing that we are not of them, nor they of us. This is an error in thinking. This ties one hand behind our back while the other is bound by the language within which we conceptualize these things. How can we trust a language whereby the word that we use to come to knowing is to understand? To stand under what? How about overstand or equistand? This is a foundational word and it speaks a kind of hierarchical because we said. I don't want to accept by rote. And why do we all have to agree anyway? We will never be able to homogenize this world, and truly, what a shame if we did. The awe that I feel when I think that no snowflake is exactly the same as any other is that same expansive resting of my mind where the possibilities simply boggle. And then us, we are profound. So much potential. We've thought of ourselves as top of the food chain, this munching chewer of all else below us, when we're meant to be stewards of this earth. We've been islands of rights, fighting, when we really need to carry the mantle of our responsibility. In this moment, each now that we experience, we have the power of choice to dream this world again, to create anew, to take the best of what has been and fashion a future that's unfathomable, diverse, open-ended, and remarkable. To do this, we need not do what they tell us, whoever they are, but rather each of us dream, delve into our passions, look around us, and see what needs doing. There's tons. It takes discernment, reflection, and self-responsibility to figure out a path that melds our abilities and our passions with what's required. We are stewards of this earth. Each one of us, everyone, has unique abilities and a world within which to express them. These are our tools. We need to match tools to need, creating a living sculpture of human solutions. We need to honor our elders and our children, encouraging them to share their gifts of wisdom and inspiration. And each one of us needs to have the courage to look in the mirror and ask, what can I do?
So thank you for that. And Gertrude, before my question, I have a question for you, because this is our unblocking day. And you said there were a few speed bumps along the way. And are there any lessons in the speed bumps for us here?
I think there two come to my mind, might be more, but one of which was that I backed up when my colleague said, I want to do this and I want to have this as a result for tonight. And I didn't fully grasp what she meant and said, okay. But actually, I didn't want that, what she wanted. And she was so like, focus, and we have to align on something. And this, it was not the words, but the energy, like we need to narrow down and, hunt the deer. And she was more like getting what she thought was needed. And I couldn't help her. And I was rather, I backed up and was a participant and fueled that food somehow. But then I realized if I don't get that really what it is about, not just backing up and giving her the room, feeling it's not right. So that was one of the things. And the other one was that in the morning, for example, she said, let's set the alarm clock at 7 because we didn't start. We started at 9, not at 10. And so I did whatever I did in the morning. And afterwards, she was upset with me because she said it's natural that you come at 7:30 and we prepare the day. I said, what? So just not assuming that the others have the same set of mind that I have, or vice versa. I didn't have a clue what she meant. But for her, it was completely, of course it is like that. So I would say, I don't know you. And I cannot presume that you know me unless I might make myself heard and realize that the other one has really grasped it. So these were two things that come to my mind right away. And this feeling something is not right, but I don't know what it is, and so I back up. For me, that's no option anymore. Just, sorry, hold on. Something is kind of, I need to go to the bottom of it, or at least later we have to talk about it. So, yeah.
So those are both perfect. You know, the universe is funny because you get exactly what you ask for. And so the question I wanted to put on the table for all of us revolves around leadership. And as a block. And so there are sort of like 4 dimensions to this. There's 2 different sets of yin and yang, just to sort of set the table in my ruminations, and but no one else need be constrained by them. But there's carrying the leadership bug. I forget the expression. Martin Luther King gave a whole speech about this being in service to good and service to ego, and I forget what he called it. It was sort of the I'll remember maybe, but there's, if I'm carrying a leadership fiber meme into the connection, so I'm wearing or imposing that hat or stirring in an expectation set experientially around that or off of that. That's at my internal. And then a sort of extension of that is, and how does that, as extended and imposed on others, right? So how am I projecting my intentionality out onto others? And then the flip side, which is being led. And what does somebody bring who's on the receiving end of that energy, be it resistance, allergic reaction, or desire, because all exist. You know, some folks really want a mom or a dad. They just really don't want to have to, you know, assume responsibility and ownership and that much work and thought process. And some folks are reactive to the power, authority, whatever that can be projected behind that as an imposition. And so it's a really rich soup. It's a really complicated, multifaceted dynamic and dimension of the old, our cultural frame, our industrial frame. And what occurs to me as a sort of another sort of binary or dimension to it, Gertrude, that sort of surfaced for me in your telling of your experience with your partner in this, was behind that strength of intention to control or to project a how-to path or mechanism in service to achieving a result, and all of that stuff on a human, experiential, and emotional level. What's behind that? Does that come from fear or not? Like, you know, how to unpack it. And with that, so that's what I'm tossing out. And I'd love to hear thoughts, reactions, augmentations.
You mean the multi-dimensionality of leadership on the giving and receiving end?
And its potential as a block. You know, its potential to actually be counterproductive, because we're about what stops people or what triggers reaction in people that is anti-generative and is value destructive.
I'll play. I think it's very, 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 very simple. I think leadership is presenting possibilities, maybe possibilities that haven't been previously considered or on the table. And on the flip side, is to be receptive and to consider the possibility. And anything that gets in the way of that might be considered non-generative.
Although it's often generative too.
Sam, you have to say it again. It's like, what?
Leadership, I think, from any position, from any chair, is putting possibility into the pool of meaning. Possibilities that may lead to some, result or state or consequence or action or decision that the group might want to proceed with. And the role of those not in that specific leadership position is to consider the possibility. Not just to completely adopt, but to consider implications, ramifications, prerequisites, etc. And I think if that's done well within a group or within an individual, then that's kind of a happy state, it seems to me.
I like that. And it seems to me that a block can happen when the one presenting the possibilities are attached to the possibility as this is what has to be done, contrary to seeing it as an addition to the pool of meaning, which can be worked upon. That's one block. and from the receiver's end, the tendency to say yes or no and stop at that seems like typical blocks. Attachment to outcome seems to be a typical block. Attachment to one idea of the outcome.
So wrinkle. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tammy.
I'm just reflecting on my own experience of leadership in this space and where I have felt blocked. I feel like there's a different way of being in terms of offering our thoughts, and as Glenn says, not being attached to the result. And there's a piece that I sense in myself and in others around having been kind of on the mountain, really in my own mind, thinking of all of these constellations of events and things we could do, and creating a kind of living sculpture in my mind. And then, but it's all of a piece in many ways inside myself. And then in bringing out pieces of that, I think there is a sense of it being interwoven with my identity. So if things are, yeah. And I'm not sure where I end and the world begins. And there's a sense that I have around how we can be more of a flat, like truly peer-to-peer, knowing that my piece is only one of billions. And that tension between having what I'm sharing being heard as I express, as I see it inside myself, and then received from others. And obviously there's different perspectives there that come into play, and different ways of understanding what I might be sharing. And so, there's this completeness that I feel inside, and the level of complexity outside of myself in relation to other people who have spent a lot of time on the mountain and have their systems and ideas all worked out. That does create some tension in communicating and in sharing, such that it can be held. I don't think the word is equally, but there's some way of weighting it so that it is somehow just as relevant. So I've been working with that, and don't have an answer, but know that I'm seeking a feeling of co-created understanding on a journey, where I can feel home, family, connected, and not responsible for the whole thing, because we're all here together. I've been thinking of Harry, what Harry says. I have my piece, but what I need is you guys. And there's a piece in that shows that flatness of connection and being a piece of the tapestry, that I can feel into what that means in terms of a different style of leadership, but it needs several metaphors to really make it land.
I think, yeah, thank you for your, this is a tapestry itself. I'm just feeling. I'm thinking of things that Ken Wilber said, this, the combination, or that both is needed or so. Humility, that I don't think that I'm above what you guys bring or whoever. So it's not that I know, it's just if whatever I can see that I bring to the party. And at the same time, he calls it the divine pride, this, the knowing that my contribution is valuable, not humility doesn't come with being humiliated, or, but with this inner knowing that this is important what we do, or what I'm here for. Here in the fire station, they had a sign that without you we are one too few. And this knowing that nobody else can just take that place that is meant for me only, in my specific way of doing this. Not that human pride, oh, I'm proud of, but this is this, yeah, connection to source, and knowing that I'm a divine being, but not taking myself too seriously or too important at the same time, and both can be there. Yeah, that what comes up. And I would love to share, this is like leading the process of appreciative inquiry, and I was in charge of the this dream phase, and what we came up with, what we call future statement is, our being is, wait a sec, we are source of appreciation, and as unexhaustible source of inspiration and appreciation, we transform ourselves and all that around us unstoppably.
I love that. Glenn, I see smoke coming out of your ears.
Really? Oh, I'm thinking about many things, but well, one thought that came to me is with what Gerard just said, that in one sense we're all leaders, in the sense that we're all, every time we're contributing, we are leading a new path into the world. So we are influencing the world. I've come to that view that everything I do or don't do will influence the whole world, even if I don't see how. And that brings me to the question of can I be a leader of myself with all of that, and what that means. This other point, I touched on it earlier, but attachment to outcome, and then the more general attachment to form, which is probably very deep and fundamental, and maybe it's difficult to even talk about, but this seems really basic to a lot of the problems that arise between people, and also the problems with ego, which is kind of the idea I have of who I am as an idea, which can be constrictive to the development of me as a process, as a movement. And then, of course, also attachment to form in the sense of my idea of who that person is and why that person brings what they bring. It's also one form in the mind, which if I'm too attached to it, it becomes a blinder in many cases, where you just hear what you expect to hear. And so identification, maybe another interesting word here, that we are identified with a certain idea of how it is or how it should be. And then the problem is, of course, that everything is moving and everything is super complex, and relates also to the poem Penny read for us about these linguistic structures, where she said the one hand tied behind our back and the other tied inside of the conceptual prison. And the difference between these concepts, which have this external frame, and then this external frame is almost taken as God, and then trying to define that as contrasted to different conceptual structure, which starts somewhere in the middle as a point of beginning from which we may move in some direction. So there's many things here, but this point of how we are all in a sense already leaders, that's interesting. Because if that point is adapted, I can't slip out the back door, so to say, and avoid responsibility. I am in fact responsible every moment, so might just make the best out of it. Also, I was curious why you brought this up, Doug, and love to hear a little bit of sort of your thoughts behind this. That's also wondering about.
Sam, you looked like you wanted to say something, and I don't want to, respond to Glenn without making sure.
Actually, Glenn almost asked what I was going to ask, which was you asked the question, and I think all of us have taken a shot at it. I was curious if you had some thoughts on that.
So I had sort of in my sort of thinking, experiencing, feeling around the meme of leadership and the work Fabian and I have done. I really have arrived at a place where it carried more sort of embedded, instilled contamination mapping to power, control, authority in its current cultural, in its current cultural frame. Sufficiently so that I don't know how it escapes those things. So I sort of, it's one of those things that in my mind, I'm not inviting to the party that I took off the table. And it's sort of like, but what is it? Because it is multidimensional, and there are parts of it that aren't about authority, control, power, that are about coordinating, that are about aggregating, organizing, that are valuable, meaningful, contributive pieces of, collective endeavor when a bunch of people come together to do something together. And so where I went was sort of, how do we unpack it? How do I unpack it? And how do I figure out the dimensions of it that can be broken out from a contribution value place, and also sort of named for what they are, and leave out the power, control, authority dimensions. And part of the imperative around it, in terms of figuring out how to relate to or do this piece differently, is because it is such a powerful, autonomically triggering tool of the industrial frame, in terms of its effect on everybody. The people, quote, being led, the people cast in the role as leaders, and all of the moving parts by and between that. And so it triggers a lot of automatic assumptions, automatic beliefs, automatic fears, automatic responses, and really dramatically limits and constrains the universe of possibility. I'm using language that I think Glenn used, Gertrude used, almost quoting it without, but I think it has all that powerful effect as an expression and a imposition that is, Sam, to your point, like destructive of value, consideration, exploration, engagement, that it's sort of like, create a leader and the trains run on time, create a leader and nobody gets on board. So the trains are running on time, but they're not taking anybody anywhere. And I just want to, because I was sharing Fabian's and my work with a guy who worked with a hospital system, And I was describing a way of getting the camel's nose in the tent in service to organizational transformation. And I was describing our process, and he looked at me and he was like, "That's interesting." He was like, "So the people in the organization become the agents of change. They co-create it and they propagate it." I said, "Yeah." And I said, "The term of the deal is that a term of our retainer is that they have to be given the resources and the authority to do that internally, unsupervised. So the leadership has to literally take a hands off. That team is not answerable to anybody." And he was like, "The problem is that sometimes, you just have to tell people when to get on and off the bus." Mapping to that control authority leadership meme, right? And I looked at him and I said, I can't for the life of me understand why, sorry, that's our doorbells in stereo. Okay, guys, thank you. So, I said, I can't for the life of me understand why you would want to hire somebody that needs to be told when to get on and off the bus. And he sort of looked at me. I was like, if that's what you're asking for, then that's what you'll get. But wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to worry about that? Like, because the people knew age present accounted for and bringing their everything to what they did every day on their own motion, because they felt engaged, empowered. They were self-motivated, self-committed, self-engaged as contributors, as value contributors and stakeholders. And he was stumped. He was stumped. So I just don't see how leadership is needed. I think there's emergent needs that arise for somebody who's gifted, talented, and loves coordinating, loves organizing, who has talent figuring out dependencies, like first this, then this, then this, and signaling, right? So that folks are getting, signals that they need when they need them. I see those as functionalities and dimensions of what are the potentially valuable dimensions of leadership, but they don't require any control, authority, or power.
So Doug, I'm actually going to see if I can re-ask a question you asked 1 or 2 or 3 meetings ago. And is it possible to consider in this room, as we step into this room from that door that we came through, can we leave that old frame behind? Can we leave behind the old frame of what leadership meant in that old frame? And think about what leadership could mean in this new world or this room that we're in? Or do we need to use that word altogether? But if you use that word, can we do it in such a way that it's generative, that it's not extracting, but bringing everybody's talents and insights to it without all the implications of power and authority and, abuse and subjugation and compensation and recognition, all of that? Can we do that? Because I think that we can. I think there are, as you are indicating, positive aspects of leadership, like these coordination, like the communication, like the visioning, like all of that, that don't have the old frame necessarily sucked into this room. So I'd like to see whether or not we can leave that at the door. Over.
And I'll confess, I sort of harbor a cognitive bias that we can't. But I don't assume I'm correct in that or that that's true. You know what I mean? I'm not like welded or married to that. And I'm not in judgment or opposition to the word being a possible reframed thing. but I do confess a cognitive bias.
Can I just ask a follow-up question on that one? Would you say Martin Luther King was an effective leader?
I just want to point out the leadership inherent in asking a question.
Sorry.
You know, I wish I could remember the word or the name that he used. Hold on one sec. I think he was a model and a voice. You know, I see him more in terms of his living and modeling in the same way Gandhi lived and modeled, in the same way that, you know, and in that, it was in service to. And if those ingredients wrapped and packaged under a quote leadership is what leadership maps to, then yes. But I think if you asked him, he might be inclined to say no.
I would ask the people that marched on the bridge.
I don't know. I don't know whether they would you know, I think that's part of the embedded challenge around it for me, because if in fact their experience and attribution was on him as their leader, there's a dimension of relating to somebody that way that speaks to Glenn's point, which is it makes an individual's contribution qualified to the extent they're not owning 100% of their contribution. The civil rights movement was a product, a co-created and co-generated product of every single person that marched and that gave their voice and that put their lives on the line. And that value contribution and ownership of that and the decision and commitment to participate isn't qualified by the fact that there was somebody that said, let's meet up over here or follow me. And I think people can have a tendency to attribute their own value and value of contribution, not attribute it, but to attach it to the guy at the front of the march. But if there's no guy at the front of the march, then it's them. Like there wasn't a leader in the Occupy movement, and there wasn't a leader in the Women's March.
There were, I think.
Well, I think there might have been women that were organizers in the beginning, but the bottom line is that in the manifestation of the march, there wasn't a guy like you saw in the 60s. You know, in the 60s, there was an Abby Hoffman and there was a Martin Luther King, and there was this one and that one. But the idea of collective empowerment, collective enfranchisement, individually internalized and experienced, this is my march, right? And I think when you tick in the quotient of a leader of, it's like stirring in this little piece of the legacy thing that may or may not be required.
See, to me, I have very little residual negative connotation for the word leader and leadership, because I see it in a lot of different places, being used effectively, being used co-creatively, being used generatively, without the trappings of power, title, authority, control, enforcement. And I've seen this. I mean, one of the things I'll actually mention right now is, for over a decade, I was in Silicon Valley as a co-chair of this thing called the Silicon Valley Engineering Leadership Community. So we actually did explore this concept at length for about a decade. And it might be through that I can see a lot of ways that you can free up this notion of leadership from the power, hierarchy, control, patriarchy, et cetera, okay? So in a sense, to revisit all of those implications of this word leadership, to me, is bringing that to the party, bringing it through the door. And that's what I would prefer not to do.
It's funny when I listen to you both. For me, the concept that the integral movement or whatever gives to that makes quite a bit sense. It's actually, in listening to you, Doug, there is a lot of blocks, like we cannot go to another layer or level of leadership because and what I understood was, there was one sentence that really struck me. We were talking about love, and then Ken said, what kind of love? What do you mean by love? The Nazis loved their families too. So leadership can be used in a very, Trump way, or it can be used in a Catholic Church way. It can be used in a predict and control way, or in the green meme, in this serving leadership. So I'm exhausted to serve you all. And it can be like, when I take numerology, the 8 is that power thing, but it's the creation. It's the power of creation. It's not the power over other people. It's like this inner, I can't help myself, I have to go there, and then maybe others follow. Because this inherent power and longing to be created that comes out and has such a power that others align, but it doesn't mean that I take power over other people. But I'm so like being source of appreciation. I told you that I did that seminar for myself, and I did it for ourselves, for the whole group, and it's still valid. But it was not me doing this and imposing us on the others, but just bringing that back, and it was so resonating with the rest of us that it's still there. We just newly created it. So I think this, when you use the word leadership, what do you mean? On what level? Talking about integral, and having worked with Frederick and transcribing the wiki, the book into a wiki, we had many discussions about what does that mean. And And one of the big things is the personal development. So the moment I think leadership is this, and I had leadership in all levels, red, amber, orange, green. So I'm fed up with that. And now to know there is something in me that wants to come out, that wants to go somewhere, and where I want to take the lead. But it's always for a purpose. It's always based on values. It's always like an inner knowing where I want to go, but not I'm happy that I have so many followers, or that I can have a role which I couldn't stand anymore. That because of my role, you have to do what, even if it's nonsense. Yeah.
When I hear this, it came to me. This is a theme I've seen in many of these talks, and after a while, I see it everywhere. And it's this. I guess it comes back to this attachment to form. That there's certain words that trigger association. They're based on the experiences we have of the words, and as we see an example here with Doug and Sam, you seem to have different associations to the word leadership, and then this image of going through this door and into this new place, and what do we leave behind and what do we take with us. I like that metaphor. One of the things I see in what we're doing here, which is very different from most leadership situations, is that the goal is not predefined. In many cases with leadership, there's a predefined goal that we all agree that this is the objective that we want to reach, and then in that situation, maybe the person who's best qualified, etc., can be given leadership responsibilities. That's different in this setting, where, as Tammy said, when you ask a question, there's a leadership role to that, and that you're adding energy to a process, but you don't know exactly where it will lead. And for some, that is frustrating. I've been in certain situations before when I've had kind of leadership responsibility, and my tendency is usually that I like to keep a lot of the details open, and I've actually gotten some negative feedback that tell us what to do, and it's like we'll figure it out there and then. Some people don't like that, so that's why maybe some will feel uncomfortable also with the generative process itself. And that's why I think in this moment in time, this sort of truly generative work is maybe not something everyone would be interested in. They will feel more comfortable in certain and more constricted frames. There's a safety to it. But that's already out the window as far as I'm concerned in this context, especially if we want to talk globally. But the main point here that I wanted to ask was, if we see this as going through the door into this unknown, is it enough to just leave leadership behind, or do we really have to leave behind our very attachment to one understanding of any concept? It's like, I know this is sort of, maybe it's a big ask, but I'm having real problems seeing something like this progress if we're having this notion that a word means this. Because when I look at the world I see, I can't find a single word that people agree what means. Not a single word. And even the most basic concepts, if you ask 10 different people to define it, soon find there's gigantic differences, and often they're invisible, and it relates to your feelings and your associations. And so in this space, seems like we are creating the meaning of the words we use. So then, is it even so important what words we use? It's like, I don't know. Of course it is important, but there may be a big challenge here to this notion that we think we know what words mean. That seems to be a big block. I see it everywhere in conversations that using certain concepts, like we talked about earlier with global system. What does that mean? Is it the ecosystem, or is it some model of how everything's supposed to be? So, do we need to leave the entire attachment to conception behind? That's one question. Because that seems to be a block that comes up again and again. We hear a word and we have our subjective reactions based on our experiences, and then we sort of take it for granted that that's similar to what others mean, but it's hardly ever the case. And that's yeah. But that again, if you take that in, you kind of fall into this state of total wonder and confusion about everything. And I mean, I see that that's sort of scary too. I mean, at some point, maybe that has to be confronted on a more basic level. Like, why are we so attached to words and specific meanings of words? Yeah, that came up.
There are different thoughts coming up, one of which is in another setting I was, we had a sales call every Monday, and one day we started to unpack the holy cows we have. So to see, what do we say, this must be there, or this is untouchable. And that was really, really interesting. So uncovering the holy cows is one of the things that might be interesting. And the other one with leadership, I think there are two other aspects. So personal development is for me one, and that goes into this wholeness and wholeness aspect. The other one is the evolutionary purpose. So purpose as a river, not as a goal or a set thing, but something that evolves over time and unspoken or outspoken, that but there's something that changes and if you can use structures or to impose specific things, or you can see at structures, what structures are serving me, or what methods, whatever, what are serving things, and what can we agree on to serve us, not as the truth or something that has to be done, or but like they call it in holacracy, they call it dynamic steering. So you make decisions at the last possible point and give structures not more than needed. So, but always in service of what we are up to and never of imposing it on others. So this is an evolving thing, and we can start and go. We don't have to have the whole concept. We don't have to decide on the structures and everything before we can do something. And then you have to restructure and throw the whole thing out again. But to steer like an organism, or like a whole wood, for example, for forest, there is this dynamic steering, and so one move makes another move, and yeah, and so we don't have to. In German, we have the expression of breaking our brains to get it all done before we can make our first step.
Yeah, I found that reference that I was trying to sum it up before. It was actually Martin Luther King's last speech, and he referred to it as the drum major instinct. And he described the drum major instinct as a, leadership projection, ego exercise, authority, power, control, all of that, versus the drum major instinct that, Gertrude, that you were referring to in terms of what drives me. What's the fire in my belly in terms of bringing what value I can bring and what I see. And he said it's not about getting rid of the drum major instinct, it's about its exercise. And so the thing that distinguishes the two, that he talks about in his speech, which was in his universe, in service to God, in service to Christ, in service to his higher sort of value and belief system. But I think it's the distinction and intention of the person behind the role or contribution, right? So it's in the actual enaction, in the doing of it. But the question that I have is, so if in principle, you can have, a leader in service to, maximizing the generative potential of the whole. And you can have a leader looking, to project power, authority, control on the whole. And the question is, is it more value generative in a transformed frame on the other side of the doorway to have a transformed but remaining construct or role of leader because of affinities that are actually positive and value generative, going forward in a new frame and us doing us differently? Or can we see ourselves to a place where that role doesn't really exist anymore? It's more a matter of people bringing their unique skills, talents, and gifts, and some of those are in sort of meta level stuff, coordinating and organizing and visioning and relating to a bigger footprint of effort going on. So that's a question. But the thing I always end up turning to and referencing for guidance, for want of a better way of putting it, is, are there any leaders in nature? And I guess the grayback in a gorilla group, or the alpha male in a lion pride, or I guess there are, right? But aren't those manifestations like almost purely power, authority, control? And do we want to accede to that part of the lower level brainstem dimension of our being, or are we recontextualizing it? And people that are used to being on the receiving end of the bad kind, are they going to be able to relate to somebody with a leader title through any other filter than the one they've grown with? And I'm complete.
I was just, as you were speaking, Doug, I was feeling into this kind of primordial soup of all of us. And then, I've got my constellation of consciousness. And once I get something, maybe I rise and I'm able to articulate a certain specific piece of what I'm learning and show and demonstrate and model. There was some pieces around, for me, I think some of the positive pieces of how leadership has been understood is around modeling a way to be, so that others can see and feel and be like, oh yeah, that works, right? Or that's inspiring, or wow, you've put that together in a way that I can see something differently. And I guess I'm feeling into that space of, the courage that it takes to rise out of that primordial soup, and then the relaxing and recognition of a different relationship with ego around going back into the primordial soup and just being a part of a constituency. And to your question of leadership in nature, I think it can be viewed in every corner of nature. This tree is seeking this kind of light, and each part of the forest is taking a different role that has a coherence that is beyond leadership, but is demonstrating a way of being in perfect relationship with the next bit, with all of the complexity that natural systems embody. So I'm curious around and testing myself, with the work with Rama of, we're just learners. We're like, okay, let's hack this stuff. Let's figure out what can happen here as we don't know, but there is some things that we do know, and we're deciding and very focused in what it is that we want to model and demonstrate. And then we, relax back into the field. And I think it's that facility of being able to be clear enough and know the moment. Like there's a lot of sensing required to know when to step in, when to share, and when to quieten and be back in the field or the tapestry. So it's that facility that I feel that this group has and our sessions have really helped to illuminate and show and demonstrate where it works and where it doesn't, where we're able to fully, be as present as we need to sense, and where we maybe keep talking even though we're repeating ourselves, kind of like I am now.
And I think that we can intellectually grasp some things, some others not, that we don't live up to, that we cannot yet fully grasp and live. But first we need to kind of project where we are going. So it's an in-between from what we really know and what we fully embody and what we can think but not yet embrace fully and live up to. Yeah.
So can I try another metaphor? Let's suppose we're back another 150, 200 years ago. I forget exactly when it was. And Henry Ford is playing around with a combustion engine, putting it on frames, putting 4 wheels on it and trying to figure out how this behaves on horse and buggy trails. What would you call a person who says, geez, if this really goes somewhere, we're going to have to flatten these trails because there's too many rocks on these trails? And then suppose another person says, hey, there's going to be a lot of these. So we're going to have to figure out, of these, do we drive on the left or do we drive on the right? Oh, and when they cross, we should have a way for people to know when to stop and when to go. Oh, and by the way, might we recommend staying under certain speeds so that we can be safe? So if you take that metaphor and you see that, a lot of people are just interested in making the combustion engine work and how the frame works and how the tires don't come off the car, et cetera, et cetera. But there are others who are asking, what happens if this scales? What happens when these roads cross? What happens when the asphalt gets old? How are we going to power these signals? All these sort of things. What would you call those roles? Do people ask those questions?
I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I have a title. I mean, I think it's a skill, talent. It's a particular aptitude, vision, capability that serves and is of value to the collective. I don't attach I see it more through that lens, and it's less about a title than it is about the value.
Right. I'm not asking really for a specific time. I'm just saying, what would you call it? Recognizing that there is value there and recognizing we don't want to call it leadership. What would you call it though?
Strategic thinking.
Right action.
Yeah. 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 And yeah, and I think you can sort of, I think part of what Tammy was saying in her last share was what you were saying in terms of this idea of contributing or originating or sourcing or sort of nourishing, future state. But I'm I'm not sure that, but that can happen, and folks can, with that added benefit insight, sort of get to the busy of, okay, how do we respond to these emerging needs individually and collectively, and but do that from sort of an emergent self-organized place.
Mycelium.
What?
Mycelium. The
Yeah, okay.
Fungi.
Yeah.
the information portals from the intergalactic mushroom universe.
Yeah, it's like thinking from that. I mean, you can have this, and where do the wheels come, and the engine, and the engineer type of thinking, and you can come from this intertwined and possibly visionary, so you can think beyond what's now. You can think beyond the actual thing that is created, and have that. And I'm not sure if all leaders can do that, all the people that are called leaders. I think that's a way of thinking. I have an example. I've studied nutrition and home economics, and we were in 12 different faculties, like chemistry, math, physics, psychology, economics, whatever. Yeah. So we had this broad thing, and not just I say the engineer type, the digging deep holes, we plowed the whole field. And one of my colleagues, he was hired by a firm that creates big ovens for restaurants and hotels and things like that. And he said, I was surrounded by engineers only, so I was the only nutrition and home economics student or graduate. Sorry. And he said, it was so funny. I was immediately looking at what do we create in this oven? Is that healthy? Is it how does it work on the food? And how do the people react to what we do when they have to handle it? And the engineers were only interested in the temperature, the material, and how does that oven work? And where do we install it, and all this. So he said, it was so like it was ingrained in my being, because I was trained that way, to look in a completely different way and have that holistic view. And the others, how do you know? And what are you thinking about? And he said that then he became the role to control that, or to have that final view on it after the wheels came on the car and things like that. So it's not that one is better than the other. It's just a completely different way of looking at things, or possibilities to grasp. And maybe we so in different levels of evolution, we decide this is more valuable than the other. And so we give you more money. And so people that have specific positions are more valuable than others. And that can change over time and with other concepts.
So I'd like to ask a question about the value of emergence. I think there's almost an implicit assumption that emergence is good and proper. I think that's half the story. I think in certain conditions in bodies, cancer cells are quite emergent. It's conducive to the environment what emerges. So Doug, when you were asking this question about, is nature full of leaders, and you gave the lions example, I said, yeah, you could see that nature is this very wonderful balance of interoperable systems and subsystems. But the thought that I then came to a couple minutes later was, nature isn't manipulated by a controlled press. Nature isn't manipulated by a military-industrial complex that's trying to control everyone's reality. It's not controlled by a worldwide financial system that's trying to suck, resources out of nature, So I came to the answer that, maybe we could come very, very close to nature and live in a much more village-like way if we identify these pathologies in the human systems that we've got. So my answer to you is, yeah, we're not yet behaving naturally in the sense of the question that you asked. Okay. So I think that emergence needs to be enabled, and it needs to be freed up, and it needs to be informed. Sunlight informs growth. Temperature informs growth. Nearby rocks inform growth. Glaciers inform growth. Likewise, in our human systems today, emergence will happen healthily if we all have access to the right set of whatever thing you want to extract from reality, whether it's, the weather, whether it's, social phenomena, whatever. If we all have access to that, I really do trust emergence. But right now, it's not clean. We're not able to get access to what's really going on. So the emergence is coming in a cancerous way. We're being fed very, very slanted sources of information from a very few set of sources. And people are operating on that, So if you let emergence happen, that's why we get the entertainment industry the way we've got. We let emergence happen, and that's why we get a president, of the nature of, 45. We need emergence to say, we don't just want what the populace or the popular or what every other mushroom wants. We need to be able to get possibilities introduced by those mushrooms on the extreme who are, let's say, much more connected, much more sensitive, much more aware of what, the current growth is going to lead to. And right now, we don't have a system where those on the extreme with that strategic sensitivity, with that strategic vision, have influence over what actually happens with the rest of us. And that's why I go back to this meme that democracy is actually a very bad system. Democracy ensures that the best ideas don't get heard. It ensures that the best ideas don't actually get considered, because the population will not take the time to understand them and does not appreciate it. That's why we have people now rejecting climate scientists. We have people rejecting, people that have studied, and really tried to come up with the best strategic understanding of what's going on. And we so easily reject it because we have a democracy. So I think this idea of emergence is incomplete. It needs to have a good basis of information.
Yeah. I just want to carry on and riff. Is that okay, Sam? Are you complete enough?
Please.
It's interesting. Emergence is absolutely happening. But what's the conscious and connected intent? I don't see that. So I feel like the work that we're doing in terms of emergence is consciously choosing to do it differently, and to feel our way into what does connect us? What are the visions that do feel like resonant spaces that we're experiencing in our own life streams? And I think that there's subtle ways and really clear ways to be able to access those, you know, to speak directly to them, or to allow in a conversational space that next piece to come and support and extend what was last said. Like these practices that we're in, I feel give us an entry point into emergence that gives each of us a opportunity to feed in and to see that next thread or broader tapestry. And it's that experience of emergence embodied that can be shared and engaged with through time, like with your time browser idea kind of models that, Sam, that we have the potential then to lead ourselves into the future, to be able to sense and know what's next and create spaces for what's missing, what we don't know that we don't know. And so that facility of being able to continue to receive that next piece to serve the understanding of the wholeness, I think those practices allow us to build the capacities to co-constitute in a way that's really real and not hung on words, but rather sensed and connected with underneath the words in practices that can be demonstrated, seen, modeled, riffed on. And it's that emergence for me that is a collective guide.
So one little question that I have about this, you mentioned with democracy and emergence. I often hear it said that democracy doesn't work very well, that free market capitalism doesn't work very well, but as it's been mentioned, it's within this framework of media, which is very contrived, sort of artificial informational flow. So would representative democracy, how would representative democracy and free market capitalism work if we were all well informed, and if there was a public debate which was quite honest and with real possibilities presented and documented with examples, and if there was a real public conversation. Because my frustration when I watch the political so-called debates is that it's not a debate at all. It doesn't even look like a real conversation. And in the echo chamber things on the internet, it's continued. I come back to that time and time again, and also our relationship with technology being again controlled by certain influences which we don't even know as to what data we're presented with, and I don't see that there are really systems in place, for example, for people to design or choose what sources they want to be exposed to. But it's, yeah, well, let's put it this way. We have a certain idea of what democracy is, what capitalism is, once again, it's these concepts, and we relate it to our experience, and the experience culturally so far is this, in my opinion, very weird media landscape where there's certain stories which go on and on and on, endlessly repeated, and then I go outside the door and I see a world which doesn't look like that at all, and it feels very artificial and contrived, and it really almost feels as if the idea of free market capitalism and the idea of representative democracy and the idea of science is all very fine ideas, but it's actually not happening. In reality, what's happening is something else, which is hard to define, but yeah. I don't even know where to go with this, but it's like if there was a different information flow, a different way of relating and sharing data, then I would expect that everything would change and the meaning of these systems would change. So yeah. That's sort of just some loose observations.
Yes, I have to step away. So sorry, I saw that you were just up there, Gertrude. I love this conversation. Thank you, everyone. I have a class that that's been moved to Sundays, so I only have till 10 to be with you all. So thank you. I look forward to watching the end of this, and I'm so sorry to duck out early. Sorry.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
I think that one fundamental flaw of democracy as we know it is that majority wins. That it depends on where you are, what underlying other laws and rules are there, like minority protection or so. But when you just take plain democracy and throw, as seen, some normal norms and rules out of the window, then it's just I got the majority and I can do whatever I want. And this is a fundamental flaw. Yeah, and many rules and norms are created to reduce that. But with deep democracy, Lona from South Africa and her husband, they created that, and to really get when I did that workshop with her, she said is that in the moment, in the very moment that you have that vote and majority takes over and says, okay, we are now the ones who can have the say, then on the other side. And that is what plays out right now. And one of her sentences is, do you need to come along? What do those people that are in minority, what do they need to go along with majority, with the ones? And that goes back experience to to specifically address that flaw.
You know, my orientation around existing systems and be it government, being it market finance, banking, fiat currency, be it extractive industry and the free market and all of that, is that all of them are part of a vision, value set, and system that was birthed by a very small, powerful, and elite segment of the population with a purpose and design, which was for them to remain a very small, elite, powerful segment of the population. And it worked. Like, they were very, very successful. And it's really run the show until now. And I think all of the sort of moving parts of the system and vision behind that are breaking down. And the global population en masse is waking up because information is available, because more people are seeing more of what else exists and what else is possible. And I think that is an emergent phenomena off the back end of the internet and technology, in service to disseminating knowledge, information, exposure, is catalyzing a transformation. And it's not something that, unlike the Industrial Revolution and the folks that birthed our current version, this one isn't controlled by anybody. And the entities and authorities and people in power and control of the old system, I'm not sure that any of them have thought about it from a political place. It's all been commercially mediated and exploitatively framed. So, you know, the power of Zuckerberg and Facebook, the power of a Google in terms of the data that they've marshaled and they control, and the absence of sort of political sophistication, awareness, or any sense of social responsibility exhibited by them in the running of their machine. Their greatest totem and biggest concern has been advertising and selling stuff and getting as good as humanly possible with all technology, full court press, and service to putting in front of you exactly the thing that, based on greatest Feynman-esque probability, you would reflexively hit buy on. So, you know, the scary part to me is less about the flaws of the old system, which I think is collapsing under its own weight, but what emerges out of all of this, part of it is to avert, you know, the catastrophe of a global extinction, but part of it is also to get to a far side that isn't horribly dystopic and unbalanced in terms of all these power, control, and authority things going on. So, you know, the emergence of holochain, the emergence of distributed systems and visions, the emergence of groups and people that are building their own. There was a tremendous map that I saw of communities that have created their own internet networks, their own internet service around the big boys on a local basis, that kind of stuff. You know, I'm more sort of plugged into time, attention, and energy on the things emerging and arising that point to the new, that point to a completely different paradigm, value system, and vision. And it is distributed, and it is rhizomatic and much more sort of biological in expression and decentralized and all of that. I mean, democracy, the United States was sort of the penultimate model, and look at what it's wrought. It's just horrifying. We've become a banana republic in a year. It's just like, how did that happen? It wasn't even conceivable or possible, I think, for most people to think it could be disassembled and destroyed so quickly. So, you know, what does new look like in terms of networks? You know, holons bumping up against other holons, communities bumping up against other communities. It's the mesh of that. How does that work? How do we do that differently? And it's cooperative and collective, not competitive. Has to be. Because it's a limited resource system.
There's one little thing which came to me, and that is, and it is related to this theme of being attached to these conceptualizations. Because a little earlier today, I saw in a different group, which is very much directed towards creating a better world, etc. And there was an article which was shared, a story about Bill Gates, who wants to invent some technology for removing CO2 from the atmosphere and be able to create clean fuel, etc. And the comment on top was, it's just reducing the symptoms to maintain business as usual. And it occurred to me that no matter what he would have brought, there would be very large numbers of people similar to us who would immediately reject it simply because he is Bill Gates and he is associated with capitalism, etc. So it doesn't really matter what it is. If it's associated with that, then it has to be bad. And that seems to be a typical example of this attachment to these stereotype ways of thinking. And because, like, what is industry, what is capitalism, what is politics? It's like a big mesh of different things. And if there is something valuable in there, as long as we're still in this frame of viewing these through these conceptual filters, if we don't like that, we're going to reject the whole thing. So I can't see any way forward, really, as long as we're stuck in these ways of thinking where we think this means that, and we're in this conceptual thing. And as long as we're in that, we're just in these endless traps. And there has to be some other way of some other way of understanding reality, really. which doesn't rest on these generalized concepts. I know I'm kind of repeating myself here, but it just seems such a big thing, because I see all these, if it's not in the subgroup that I identify with, if it's the other group, if it's the capitalists or whatever, then yeah, it's just to protect business as usual. So it's this cynicism, and it seems really disempowering. And you have like these gigantic networks of internet activists who really just complain about everything that's wrong, and even solutions which are perhaps obviously good and at least promising, they're just immediately rejected because it comes from the wrong place. And then I just see that as a real challenge. This identification with these categories, and yeah, it takes so many.
Thank you. As Sam and I have to leave, I would have a request that we wrap it up, and so to harvest what we talked about today. Yeah,
Would you like
rather than each and everyone dropping out one at a time.
Would you like to go first?
This is not by the minute, but I can go second or third. That's no problem. But I would rather have that with you than just drop out.
Sam, you're muted.
You're still muted, Sam. You have two videos on the screen, and one of them is muted. Maybe there's those, one for video and one for audio.
Well, Glenn, do you want to do a final while Sam figures out audio?
Yeah, okay, I'll just be brief, but yeah, what I just said, is sort of what I'm coming back to. I really see it as this fundamental block that being inside of a concept. I just and identifying with it and identifying with a certain group, etc. is very related to all this. And if I could imagine a different kind of leadership, it would be something which is in a frame where all conceptions are viewed as dynamic. And that's my dream. I could see that work, but that would require an degree of being comfortable with uncertainty, because for sure it does give a sense of certainty. So, because I don't see people not understanding this. I think everyone sort of understands that these are limitations, but it's sort of scary to go outside of them. So is there a way to proceed and organize things collectively, and demonstrate examples and show visions which can kind of escape these endless traps of being identified with some conceptual framework? This question's been on my mind I have many ideas about it, but it's a very, very big issue because it goes so deep. This is like something that's been going on for thousands of years or even more. So it's a big, big thing, but that's that's the big challenge. What we talked about today really, in many examples of these issues that come up related to this. So, but yeah, I also think that what we're doing here is establishing an alternative, and in a small scale, we've already demonstrated that we can actually get quite far and reach degrees of understanding and present possibilities and show a certain leadership which is in a different paradigm. And so I believe that it can be done, but it's a big project. So yeah, I think it will need some more time and effort and patience. Yeah. And also, the world is already quite beautiful, and we actually do some things not all that bad. Like, even with all the mistakes, like I have water in the tap. Like, I'm pretty happy about that. So, but it's not like we're a total catastrophe either. I guess that's important to remember also. So, yeah.
Sam, are you there? I did hear you right before Glenn started talking. Oh, we can't hear. We can't hear you.
I'm just reading what Sam. We had a private conversation, and he was so first, leadership as a vision of possibility to be followed up. And second, emergence needs to be nourished by proper sunlight and information, eco-environment. That is what Sam said or wrote.
Did you write that in the chat now, or?
Third is leave baggage at the door.
Yeah.
Always a good thing.
Yeah, maybe when Sam saves it, he can unprivate it, make it not private anymore. So
Gertrude, you want to wrap?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And I just thought through, I mean, this is another concept, but broader than we used to have, through the integral lens, that describes what you said, Glenn, from like before and the first tier. This is like you make everybody wrong who doesn't think like you do, even if you're evolving. Like you can look down on the Catholic Church, for example, when you're evolved into the orange meme where it's about facts and structures and predicting control. So every meme says I'm better than the others. and when you tap into that second tier and integral framework, and he says, you don't know what's happening because it's the very first time that you can consider that other people may be wrong, may be right in some. So it's true, but partial. So you can see what's there and can just take from that whole thing and not just be stuck in your own meme. So I think that's what she said. We don't have what happens when we say there is truth in every level. That is one part, and I'm very grateful for your question, Doug. That led to a space where I even felt that expanded the space. I could feel that we listened with more depth, even beyond what we usually do. But there was some space in between also. And I really like that way of conversations where things can be expressed, sink in and sensed, and then an answer emerges. So thank you for that space today. Interesting theme. Yeah, good to see you again.
Well, thank you for being here, and it was terrific for me to have the opportunity to open that question and, have us sort of play with it and kick it around and dig into it and pull it apart. Not from a place of attachment. Like, that's the difference for me of these Sunday conversations, which is that we're going into really powerful centers of gravity mimetically. Like, these ideas are really active, loaded ideas and domains for people, I think, in general, and to be able to sort of really dive into them and, shine some light and give it some space and time and attention. And it's in the sharing, it's in that inquiry, that for me, there's huge value. And so thank you very much. This was the first time, actually, I've been able to, I feel like I've been able to be part of a conversation around leadership that was not, didn't have anyone in it with a center of pull around it. So that was really nice and really satisfying. And, with that, enjoy your Sundays.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was wonderfully generative as always. So, see you later, guys.
And Sam, I hope you're
Thank
there.
you
And
all.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Also.
Bye, Sam, as well.